There was a rock band in I think it was the 80s, or maybe it was the 90s. I don't even know anymore. But anyway, they had this song. It was called Cult of Personality. And it was kind of a history a little bit of the 60s and the 50s and even a little bit of the 40s where this songwriter would pin up against like Kennedy, Khrushchev, or Hitler and Mussolini or whatever. And the song would go back and forth on these different characters, even Martin Luther King and somebody else. And he would go back and forth and talk about the cult of personality, the way in which we can cultivate such worship towards certain personalities or aspects of our life and seemingly attribute to creatures, namely people, leaders, and sometimes even ourselves, the attributes that are truly from God. Substantial humility is a great gospel characteristic, and I would suggest that our very great grouping is aspiring to inspire all of us to truly be in that gospel greatness, which is summarized perfectly here by Jesus. Everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. The one who humbles himself will be exalted. That is gospel greatness. It is not worldly greatness. And to grasp that is to see the thread of holiness in the hearts of every saint. And to grasp that is the key component of our identification in Christ so as one day to be up to heaven. It's the consistent message of Jesus Christ. It's the message of the scriptures. And it is exactly what the biggest temptation in our world is. You know, I've been a priest for almost 15 years, and I go to confession regularly, get to hear confessions, and I can say that the least confessed sin that I've ever confessed, and I don't know if it's the same in your life, is the sin of idolatry. I don't know if I've ever confessed the sin of idolatry in a confession. I'm not sure if you ever have. One of my favorite thinkers he was a Jesuit philosopher. His name was Father James Shaw. He's from Georgetown, and he had a huge impact on my life. I actually got to meet him, and he talks about idolatry. I just want to read a couple phrases from this and then come back to this substantial humility. He says, "Our exterior cult is a sign of our interior position. We are lying before God if we acknowledge other gods before him under any circumstance." In itself, and now he's speaking about Thomas Aquinas, this dear Father James Shaw, Aquinas says idolatry is the most grave of sins. Why? Because our highest act is to return to God the praise due to him. The worst of the objective sins committed against God is that what attributes to a creature what properly belongs to God. There's a real wise nugget in there, that the worst of the objective sins committed against God is that which attributes to a creature what properly belongs to God. One of the marks, Father Shaw would go on to say, inspired by St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the marks of God is that he is self-sufficient. When God created the cosmos, he did not need our help. When he does things, he doesn't even require us to be a part of it. He does not require our worship. And the essence of idolatry would seem to be elevating some being, especially ourselves, to the cult of personality, to take the place of God. And isn't it great that we don't have that problem today in our world today? Like the cult of a personality, whether it be some figure in our politics, or the cult of a personality, or the cult of our sexual identity being the organizational principle of education systems, of our politics, of our very economic systems today. It's seeming like we're lifting up those who are most confused sexually and putting them on the altar for us to worship them, and everything needs to be designed around it. It's as if that's the organizing principle of our community, of our culture. It's as if we're seemingly worshiping things as if they are God and taking God out of that place. And when we do that, what happens? We look at our society today and it's confused. Our families are ravaged. And we uphold the killing of preborn babies in the womb as if that's something that's good and we need that right. And you see it throughout the biblical text over and over again. Where do we see the quote-unquote anger of God, the real force of God when he's trying to convince his Israelite people, do not make molten calves and get involved in these sexual deviancies. And Moses sees that coming down the hill. And over again, we recognize in our own lives how easy it can be to become self-sufficient. It's enough just to look at a bookstore today and you see all the self-help. It's as if there's 5 steps to joy and Jesus is not one of those steps. It's as if we're living in a world that no longer wants to acknowledge that the pattern of happiness and joy, and I would say, I know this sounds crazy, ultimate freedom is letting Jesus free us to follow him. When we look at this gospel today, we can't help but to see that this dear Pharisee, and it all gets teed up with what Jesus says at the beginning. Jesus addressed this parable to those who were convinced of their own righteousness and despised everyone else. It's easy to seep into our culture today and think of our own righteousness and to live in our public world as if God doesn't exist because we don't want to infringe our feelings and our thoughts of Jesus Christ in the world, and we would never force that upon anybody. And so we need to then live in a world in which we're convinced of our own righteousness. And Jesus is speaking just to that. He wants to try to pierce that and invite us into a deeper love and humility. I felt this personally. I was in a religious community for 18 years. And it dawned on me yesterday that this community revolved around this charismatic leader named Maciel. And what Maciel did, he was the religious founder of this religious group called the Legionaries of Christ. Everything was revolved around him. And we even called him Nostro Padre, and when we would address him, we would kneel down and we would kiss his hand. And we'd call him Nostro Padre, which means our Father. One day, as I was in this community towards the end, when I knew I couldn't stand it anymore, there was something going on here that just wasn't right. I counted up the liturgical feast days were dedicated to him, like his birth date, his baptismal day, the day of his ordination, the day he took the vows, all these different things about his life. And we had more feast days dedicated to Maciel than we did to Jesus Christ. That is a cult of personality. That is idolatry. That is the worship and taking the attributes of a creature and putting them on the place of the altar where only God deserves to be worshipped and adored. And worse yet, what was behind him? Why did Maciel do that? He was a bisexual, totally confused sexual man. He was, both sides of the ball game. He was everywhere on that. And he knew he needed to set up a group that would control everything so that he could maintain his lifestyle. And so in the end, what were we doing? And that's where Jesus Christ comes to talk to us and shows us the way out of this world in which seemingly is uplifting the most awful sins that we could think of in terms of our relationship with other people, to commit the ultimate sin, which is to attribute to creatures what needs to be attributed only to God. It's interesting as Shaw would continue this, he goes, God is hated in the modern world because he has a plan for our order of our life, for our salvation, other than the one we concoct for ourselves. Imagine that, how inconvenient it is that God might have a better plan for the one that we concoct. Anyway, we are asked to obey the commandments, including the commandment to have no strange gods before him. And he concludes, and this obedience is the ultimate light by which we see what we are, not gods. In the end, the invitation of the tax collector is an invitation from the heart of Christ. As I look out today, it's so beautiful to see, I think there's 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 little children in here. And I think all of them are in the same posture. They're cuddled up with their parents. The childlike dependency on God is the most freeing, fulfilling, and truly faithful way to be in relationship with the Lord, because in the end, he is our Father. He sent us Mary to be our mother, and Jesus to be our Savior. Note, we're none of those. We're children in the hands of our Father. And when we live like this dear tax collector saying, "Oh God, be merciful to me, a sinner," it's not some false like, "Oh, I'm just a useless human being." It's to recognize that when we humble ourselves, when we become like children and totally dependent on God, that's when we can be lifted up into the arms of our Father. In the end, the key is to Eucharize, which is what Jesus does at every Mass, in every altar in the Catholic Church. He humbles himself so as to exalt us.